After the Industrial Revolution's initial wave in England, it began to move. In other words, the Industrial Revolution began to diffuse. The first place it diffused to was places, logically, that had direct ties to England. So, for example, the United States, Canada, Australia, places like that. And then direct ties to Europe, because Europe absorbed the Industrial Revolution very rapidly because it's right next to England. But, at least at first, a country had to have the ability to accommodate factories with natural resources, or at least access to natural resources, and labor and capital in order to begin to go through the Industrial Revolution. And at first, only wealthy countries could provide those things, like the United States, Canada, Australia, Japan. I know Japan seems like an oddball here, but Japan kind of awoke from a self-imposed slumber in the middle of the 1800s. Being an island nation, it looked to the way England or the United Kingdom have been able to develop itself as a small island nation, and Japan just basically followed that model, became an important manufacturing center, became an important shipping center, and eventually became an important navy as well, as we know. And Europe, those were the places. Now, in the post-World War II era, do you remember when World War II ends? Hold on, I'll wait, see if you can catch the answer. 1945, very good. So after 1945, there began to be increasing competition from developing countries. In other words, developed countries were not just going to compete against themselves and against each other with regard to manufacturing and industry. They were now going to have to compete against developing countries. This accelerated very rapidly in the 1970s. At first with countries like South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, and a city like Hong Kong. Then eventually in Latin America, like Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, Honduras, El Salvador, and others. China, of course, as we all know. And then places like Vietnam, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Egypt, Turkey. All of these places began to compete against the developed countries for manufacturing jobs. Why? How? So why did this happen? How could this have happened? So in other words, how did the developed countries lose out to developing countries? Industrial locational factors kind of changed. It began to be a race for the cheapest labor, the lightest tax burdens, the weakest labor laws, and the lowest interest in environmental protections. Well, where was that going to be? All of which permitted maximizing profits for the corporation while producing the highest dividends for investors. If you invest money in the stock market, you want to make money off of that money. That's what this means. Where can I make the most money? Well, you have to cut down on costs and increase profits. That's the way you do it. Unfortunately for the developed countries, let's take our own country, the United States, as an example. That threw those countries into something called deindustrialization, kind of like a manufacturing and industrial death spiral. And deindustrialization is the loss of a country's industrial base, its manufacturing sector, to cheaper labor markets. This created what's commonly known in the United States as the Rust Belt. At one point, the Rust Belt was what we called in this country the manufacturing belt. It's the area around the Great Lakes. So, for example, the southern part of Wisconsin, the northern part of Illinois, the northern part of Indiana, the southern part of Michigan, basically all of Ohio, the western part of Pennsylvania, and the western part of New York. Cities like Milwaukee, Chicago, Gary, Indiana, Fort Wayne, Indiana, Detroit, of course, Grand Rapids, Flint, Toledo, Cleveland, Dayton, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse. All of these places were massive manufacturing centers. I mean, after all, think about it. What is the name of Pittsburgh's football team? I won't say it, but you know what I mean, okay? And what happened was these places that employed millions of people produced products that were sold all over the world, now had the corpses of these huge factories. Things closed down. These people lost their jobs. They lost their houses. And the cities themselves, all of those cities I just mentioned, have gone through this deindustrialization. And they've lost their ability to employ people, or at least initially lost their ability to employ people. And so those people became unemployed and not happy about it. Developed countries remain a major market, but developing countries are growing both as manufacturing centers and as emerging markets. Because the developing countries themselves, as they produce wealth, the people who live in them want to buy these things. Take a look at these pictures. That upper left-hand picture, that's Beijing. I was in Beijing when none of those buildings existed, back in the early 90s. It was just all 2 and 3 stories, low-level, small, sprawling city. The upper right-hand picture is Saigon, also known as Ho Chi Minh City. Bottom left-hand picture, Mexico City. And then the bottom right-hand picture is a suburb in China. They're all growing, and it's the result of industrialization and the Industrial Revolution moving on to developing countries. Is there blame for this? As in, is there blame for developed countries losing their industrial base? Well, we're kind of all complicit in it, aren't we? Have you ever shopped at Walmart or Target? You look at where the things come from and how cheap they are. What do you keep in your garage? Hold on to yourself. When I was a kid, we used to park cars in the garage. Now garages have become our personal storage units. Do you check to see where your manufactured products come from? Do you look and say, oh, this is made in the United States, or this is made in Vietnam, or this is made in India? And if I have a choice in buying something from China or the United States, am I really going to put the extra money down to support American manufacturing and American jobs, or am I going to buy the cheaper product? Why can China make a t-shirt cheaper than the United States? Why is that? One of the main things is cheap labor.